Hey everyone, my name is Rigatoni Jack, and if you enjoy stories about cats, dating disasters, and life's awkward moments, make sure to hit subscribe and ring that bell. Story 1. I never planned to become one of those people who talk to their cats. You know the type. The ones who have full conversations with their pets about interest rates and Netflix shows, who celebrate their cats' birthdays with tiny party hats and salmon-flavoured cake. And yet here I am, single again, because I told my cat she was beautiful while my girlfriend sat 3 feet away, presumably not feeling particularly beautiful herself. The cat in question is Susan, a name I gave her 5 years ago in what I thought was an ironic gesture. Wouldn't it be funny, I said to no one in particular, to give a cat an aggressively human name? Now I catch myself saying things like, Susan, please stop watching me pee, and Susan, that's not your coffee, that's my coffee. And I realise the joke has somehow turned on me. Susan is, objectively speaking, a pretty cat. She's calico, which means she looks like someone spilled several cans of paint on her and then tried to fix it with whiteout. But it works for her, in the same way that some people can wear patterns that would make the rest of us look like escaped circus performers. I tell her this often, usually when we're alone, because that's what cat people do when we think no one is listening. We explain things to our cats. My girlfriend Liz, or rather my ex-girlfriend Liz, as of approximately 48 hours ago, was not a cat person. This should have been my first warning sign, but I ignored it because she had other appealing qualities, like being human and laughing at my jokes. She tolerated Susan the way one tolerates a roommate's unusual hobby, with a mix of polite disinterest and barely concealed judgment. For 2 months, Susan and Liz engaged in an elaborate dance of avoidance that would have impressed a Cold War spy. Susan would peek around corners like a furry surveillance operative, while Liz would pretend not to notice, as though acknowledging the cat's existence might somehow trap her in a conversation about litter brands and the relative merits of wet versus dry food. Then came what I now refer to as the Family Guy incident. It was a Sunday, which meant I was wearing what I call my fancy sweatpants, the ones without any visible food stains. Liz and I were on the couch watching Peter Griffin make questionable life choices when Susan decided to make her grand entrance. She jumped into my lap with the kind of confidence usually reserved for people who peaked in high school. Without thinking, because thinking has never been my strong suit, I started my usual routine of telling Susan how pretty she was. This is something I do partly out of habit and partly because I genuinely believe cats need regular ego boosts to prevent them from plotting our deaths. You're the most beautiful girl in the world, I said, scratching behind her ears. Now, in my defense, I've said this to Susan countless times. I've said it while she was throwing up on my laptop. I've said it while she was actively trying to murder my houseplants. I've even said it when she brought me a half-dead moth as a gift, like some tiny furry mobster sending a message. But apparently saying it while your girlfriend of 2 months sits next to you is what therapists might call a problematic behaviour. Liz went to the bathroom and stayed there long enough for me to wonder if she'd discovered a portal to Narnia behind my shower curtain. When she emerged, her face had that special kind of tightness that suggests someone has been practicing their angry speech in the mirror. You're a weirdo who loves his cat more than the actual human woman sitting next to you, she said, which wasn't so much an accusation as it was a statement of fact. Like pointing out that water is wet or that my fashion sense peaked in 2012. I could have denied it. I could have launched into a detailed explanation about different types of love and how they can't really be compared. I could have pointed out that Susan has seen me cry while watching dog food commercials and still chooses to live with me. Instead, I sat there with the kind of blank expression that suggests either deep contemplation or a minor stroke. Liz left. By the time I thought to check if she'd made it home safely, I discovered she'd blocked me on every platform except LinkedIn, which I think means we're still technically professional acquaintances. Susan, displaying the emotional intelligence that makes cats simultaneously wonderful and terrifying, immediately came to comfort me. She pressed her head against my chest and purred, which in cat language probably means either I love you or I told you so. With cats, it's often hard to tell the difference. The truth is, I do love Susan more than I loved Liz. I love her more than I've loved most people. She's been there through 3 jobs, 2 apartments, and 1 particularly regrettable attempt at growing a moustache. She doesn't judge me for eating cereal for dinner or talking to myself while I do the dishes. She just exists alongside me, occasionally knocking things off tables to remind me that chaos is the natural order of the universe. Maybe this makes me a weirdo. Maybe it means I'll end up as one of those people who has more photos of their cat on their phone than of actual humans. But if loving a cat more than a person I've known for 8 weeks is wrong, then I don't want to be right. Besides, Susan really is the most beautiful girl in the world. Just don't tell my next girlfriend I said that. Story 2. There are certain things they don't tell you in parenting classes. How to swaddle a baby, yes. The proper temperature for a bottle, certainly. But nowhere in the endless parade of pamphlets and YouTube tutorials do they warn you about criminally intelligent cats with an apparent vendetta against birth control. This seems like a significant oversight. Our first child arrived like a plot twist in a medical drama, 2 months early, weighing about as much as a bag of sugar, preceded by weeks of my wife being confined to bed rest while battling something called preeclampsia, which sounds like a fancy vampire disease but is actually much worse. The whole experience left us with 2 things: a perfectly healthy but tiny son, and the firm conviction that we should wait a few years before doing this again. Nature, however, had other plans, or more specifically, our cat did. I should explain about the cat. He's orange, which anyone familiar with orange cats will recognize as less of a color and more of a personality disorder. We didn't so much adopt him as enter into a hostage situation where we provide food and shelter, and in return, he systematically dismantles our home piece by piece. The first few weeks after his arrival, I genuinely believed our house was haunted, because every morning I'd wake up to find all the kitchen cabinets standing wide open, like some kind of domestic poltergeist had thrown a midnight rager. This cat, this criminal mastermind in a fur suit, can open any door, unlock any drawer, and bypass any security measure with the kind of skill that would make Ocean's 11 look like amateur hour. I once caught him using his paw to test the temperature of his water bowl, which should have been my first warning that we weren't dealing with your average feline. The trouble began, as trouble often does, with Q-tips. The cat had developed an obsession with them that bordered on religious fervor. He would seek them out with the determination of a heat-seeking missile, leaving behind a crime scene of shredded cotton and plastic stems that looked like a miniature massacre. This fascination was unfortunate because I had, in what I now recognize as a stunning display of poor judgment, stored our box of condoms in the same drawer as his cotton prey. You can probably see where this is going. One afternoon, I came home to find what looked like a collaboration between Jackson Pollock and a Q-tip factory. Cotton fluff, plastic sticks, and shiny gold condom wrappers strewn across the floor like some deranged art installation. I did what any reasonable person would do. I scooped up the condoms, put them back in their box, and filed the incident under just another day living with a chaos demon. Later that night, in what can only be described as a perfect storm of poor lighting and worse decision-making, I reached into that same box without inspecting its contents. Like a teenager sneaking into a rated R movie, I just assumed everything was fine because the packaging looked intact. Cut to a few weeks later. My wife started experiencing some familiar symptoms, the kind that had preceded our first child's arrival. We exchanged glances that contained entire conversations, most of them variations on "oh no." 3 pregnancy tests later, because apparently one wasn't definitive enough, we found ourselves staring at a trio of positive results and trying to figure out exactly how we'd managed to fail at basic contraception. That's when the memory of the great Q-tip massacre came flooding back. I dumped out the box of remaining condoms like a detective examining crucial evidence, and there they were, tiny teeth marks and punctures in the foil wrappers, as if our cat had decided to play dental hygienist with our birth control. Our orange menace had orchestrated the perfect crime. He'd identified our contraceptive weakness, executed a precision strike, and covered his tracks so well that we didn't realize what had happened until it was far too late. If cats could high-five, I'm sure he would have been celebrating with his fellow feline conspirators. So here we are, expecting our second child months ahead of schedule, all because our cat apparently decided our family planning timeline needed some feline intervention. I've since moved the remaining intact condoms to a locked safe, which the cat watches with an expression that seems to say, "challenge accepted." The real kicker? Our first child, now nearly 1, still hasn't mastered the art of object permanence, while our cat is out here performing reproductive sabotage with surgical precision. I'm not saying he's smarter than our baby, but I'm also not saying that. I suppose someday we'll have to explain to our second child that they owe their existence to an orange cat with a passion for Q-tips and a talent for tactical warfare. It'll make for an interesting addition to the baby book, right between first steps and first words. Conception made possible by feline interference. At least we can be reasonably certain the cat won't get into any more trouble with birth control. Not because he's reformed his ways, mind you, but because we're seriously considering making this our last child. Some battles you just have to concede, especially when your opponent has 9 lives and apparently a degree in reproductive endocrinology. For now, the cat seems rather pleased with himself, lounging in sunbeams with the smug satisfaction of a chess master who's just executed a particularly clever gambit. I catch him sometimes, watching my wife's growing belly with what I swear is pride, as if he's thinking, my work here is done. And somewhere out there, I'm convinced there's a secret society of cats nodding in approval at his handiwork, plotting their next intervention in human affairs. Keep an eye on your Q-tips, folks, and maybe invest in a safe. Story 3. There are certain milestones they warn you about when you get a cat. The first hairball, the inevitable 3 a.m. zoomies, the day they figure out how to open the treat drawer. What they don't prepare you for is the moment your cat develops a streaming addiction and starts demanding to speak to Netflix's manager. It started innocently enough, as most catastrophes do. My TV died the kind of death that makes repair shops shake their heads sympathetically while drafting estimates that could finance a small yacht. Rather than replace it with another soon-to-be obsolete flat screen, I decided to join the projector revolution. It'll be like having my own movie theatre, I thought, displaying the kind of optimism usually reserved for people who believe they can assemble IKEA furniture without the instructions. The projector arrived in a box that my cat immediately claimed as her new fortress of solitude, which should have been my first warning sign about her relationship with my entertainment choices. After several hours of setup during which I learned that my geometry teacher was right, I would need those skills someday. I had successfully transformed my living room wall into a reasonable facsimile of a cinema screen. That's when I had what I now recognize as my first terrible idea. I wonder what would happen if I showed my cat one of those videos made for cats. If you're not familiar with cat videos on YouTube, let me explain. There's an entire genre dedicated to footage of birds, mice, and insects scurrying across the screen, designed to drive cats into a state of prehistoric hunting frenzy. It's like catnip for their eyeballs. My cat, who up until this point had shown more interest in the box the projector came in than anything actually projected on the wall, suddenly transformed into the world's most attentive film critic. She sat there, completely transfixed, as digital mice scampered across my living room wall. Her tail twitched with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for serial killers and people trying to parallel park. For an hour she lived her best life, occasionally making the kind of chittering noise cats make when they see birds through windows. A sound that falls somewhere between excitement and frustration, like a sports fan watching their team lose in overtime. When I finally turned off the projector for the night, she gave me a look that suggested I had just cancelled Christmas. Still, I didn't think much of it. After all, how much damage could a few cat videos do? As it turns out, quite a lot. Over the next few days, I continued to indulge her newfound passion for digital entertainment. Look how cute she is, I'd say to absolutely no one, as she attempted to catch projected butterflies with the determination of a Victorian explorer hunting for Bigfoot. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't entertaining my cat. I was creating a monster. The first sign of trouble came during the ads. You know those YouTube ads that pop up right when you're about to learn how to make the perfect souffle or fix your washing machine? My cat started treating them like personal attacks. She would growl at the screen with the kind of righteous indignation usually reserved for people who find out their favorite book is being adapted into a movie starring James Corden. Then came the complaints. My cat developed an entirely new vocabulary of sounds, each one specifically designed to express her dissatisfaction with the current programming schedule. There was the, "Why aren't there birds on the wall?" Meow the, I can see you're watching something that isn't mice chirp, and the how dare you turn off my stories yowl, which sounds remarkably similar to a small car having an existential crisis. To add insult to injury, my YouTube algorithm, that digital crystal ball that's supposed to know me better than I know myself, now thinks I'm running some sort of feline focus group. My recommended videos have become a bizarre safari of rodents, flying insects, and laser pointers. The other day, it suggested I might enjoy 10 hours of fish swimming for cats, as if I'm the one who spends my afternoon stalking virtual sardines. I've created a situation where my cat has better screen time habits than most teenagers. She has favourite channels. She has opinions about content. I'm pretty sure if she had opposable thumbs, she'd be leaving strongly worded comments about the lack of realistic mouse physics in certain videos. The final indignity came last night when I tried to watch a documentary about ancient Egypt. My cat sat in front of the projector, deliberately blocking Ramesses II's face with her tail, until I switched to her preferred programming. I've become a butler to a fur-covered film critic who doesn't even have a letterbox account. They say technology is making us all more connected, but I don't remember anyone mentioning it would turn my cat into a streaming service junkie who gets angry about buffer times. I'm now living with a creature who has stronger opinions about content delivery than most film school graduates. So if you're thinking about showing your cat some videos on a giant projector screen, maybe don't. Unless, of course, you're prepared to explain to dinner guests why you can't watch the game because your cat has already queued up 3 hours of squirrel footage. At least she hasn't figured out how to use the remote. Yet. Story 4. There's something about eating a popsicle with someone who's breaking up with you that feels distinctly millennial. Like avocado toast or student debt, it's the kind of thing that would make our grandparents shake their heads and mutter about how their generation handled heartbreak with dignity and whiskey, not frozen sugar on a stick. My cat, Margot, was watching us from her perch on the back of the couch, performing her best impression of a marriage counsellor who's seen it all before. I say best impression because she was also actively trying to steal Rachel's popsicle every time it came within range, which I assume most licensed therapists don't do. Rachel had texted me earlier that evening asking if we could talk. In the modern dating landscape, can we talk? Rank somewhere between I think I left my chapstick at your place and I've joined a cult in terms of ominous messages. But I said yes, because that's what you do when you care about someone. Even if that someone recently stormed out of your apartment because you called your cat the most beautiful girl in the world within her earshot. I should mention here that I'm bisexual and polyamorous. Two things I generally announce about myself with the same enthusiasm that marathon runners announce their training schedule. Not because I want it to be my whole personality, but because it seems like the kind of information that should come before someone decides whether to share their HBO Max password with you. When Rachel and I first met, bonding over our mutual appreciation for cartoons that would make our parents question our life choices, she told me she was familiar with open relationships. What she hadn't mentioned was that her experience was less conscious, ethical non-monogamy, and more watching her ex-boyfriend slowly replace her with someone else while gasping no homo every time he caught feelings. This, as it turns out, was kind of important context. She sat on my couch that night, clutching a glass of water like it was keeping her tethered to earth, and told me about her ex. About how he'd suggested opening their relationship, found another girl, and then proceeded to perform the relationship equivalent of slowly moving his stuff into a new apartment while insisting he was just reorganizing. He'd spend their date nights texting this other woman or talking about how amazing she was, until eventually he dropped the pretense entirely and just moved in with her, leaving Rachel with the kind of trust issues that make airport security look relaxed. Suddenly, my enthusiastic cat appreciation made more sense. Margot, who was now alternating between accepting pets from both of us like some kind of furry Switzerland, probably doesn't need verbal validation. Her love language is more along the lines of knocking things off tables and sitting on whatever you're trying to read. Meanwhile, Rachel, being human and therefore cursed with the ability to understand English, had heard my effusive praise of Margot through the filter of her past trauma. "I want to keep seeing you," she said, "but I can't do polyamory again." I felt the familiar weight of that request. I've tried monogamy before, the way some people try to learn juggling with good intentions but inevitable disaster. I've got the emotional scars to prove it. 3 failed attempts at being someone I'm not. each one ending with the kind of conversations that make you wish you could hire a professional mediator. "I can't be what you need," I told her, watching her face as the words landed. She cried, and I did what any reasonable person would do in that situation. I went to the freezer and got us popsicles. Cherry for her, grape for me, because even in crisis, I have standards. There's something about shared sugar consumption that makes heavy conversations feel lighter. We talked more about her ex, who sounds like he needs several years of therapy and maybe a mild curse, about relationships, about boundaries, about how sometimes caring about someone means knowing when to let them go. She gathered up the random items she'd left at my place: a hair tie, a charger, half a pack of gum. The archaeological evidence of a relationship that had barely begun before it ended. The kind of things you don't notice accumulating until suddenly you're putting them in a pile and realizing how much space they've taken up. "I feel kind of unhinged," she admitted, laughing through tears, being jealous of a cat. Margot, who had given up on stealing our popsicles and was now cleaning herself with the kind of dedicated focus usually reserved for bomb disposal, paused her grooming to give Rachel what might have been a sympathetic look, or gas. With cats, it's hard to tell. I promised to text her best friend tomorrow, ask them to check in on her. It seems like the kind of thing a decent person would do, and I'm trying to be one of those, even if I'm the kind of decent person who accidentally triggers someone's relationship trauma by complimenting their cat. As she left, Margot watched her go with the kind of inscrutable expression that cats reserve for moments they know are significant but refuse to explain why. Like she understood something about human nature that we're all still figuring out. Maybe this was the best possible outcome. No villains, just people trying their best to navigate love and loss and the complicated space between them. Well, except for Rachel's ex, he can still villain it up somewhere else. In the end, all we can do is be honest about who we are and hope that's enough. Sometimes it isn't, and that's okay too. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is share a popsicle, say goodbye, and let each other go find the right kind of love. As for Margot, she's still the most beautiful girl in the world. But maybe next time I'll wait until the human woman on my couch leaves before I tell her that. Quick pause here. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button. It really helps the channel, and there's plenty more chaos coming up. Story 5. There are moments in life when you realize that noise-cancelling headphones, while excellent for drowning out your neighbour's amateur kazoo practice, might occasionally put you at risk of accidentally tumble-drying your cat. This is not the kind of warning they put on the box. I was having what I like to call a productive adult day trademark, the kind where you actually do laundry instead of just thinking about doing laundry while watching Netflix. My premium noise-cancelling headphones were performing their duties admirably, transforming the mundane task of emptying the dishwasher into what felt like a music video about a person emptying a dishwasher. The fact that no one wants to watch a music video about emptying a dishwasher is beside the point. The laundry situation needed addressing, specifically a load of bedding that had been sitting in the dryer long enough to develop its own civilization. I made the executive decision to give it a quick fluff, to convince myself and any future house guests that the wrinkles were intentional, part of that casual chic aesthetic that absolutely nobody is buying. This is where my cat Lucy enters the story, though not in the way you might expect. Lucy, my first cat, is typically what I'd call a professional coward. Her usual response to any unexpected noise is to teleport to the furthest corner of the house, possibly breaking several laws of physics in the process. But there she was, standing in the laundry room with her fur puffed out like she'd just stuck her paw in an electrical socket, staring at me with the kind of intensity usually reserved for unopened cans of tuna. Now, if you've never seen a cat trying to communicate something urgent while you're wearing noise-cancelling headphones, imagine trying to play charades with someone who thinks you're deliberately ignoring them and also happens to be covered in fur. Lucy kept looking from me to the dryer and back again, her tail getting progressively poofier with each rotation. I assumed, with the kind of logic that only makes sense when you can't hear what's actually happening, that she was scared of the dryer. Maybe there was some loose change in there doing its best impression of a small percussion section. I turned off the dryer in what I thought was a magnanimous gesture of feline consideration. "There you go," I probably said, though I couldn't hear myself. "The big scary dryer is off now." Lucy remained unimpressed. In fact, she looked even more concerned, if that was possible. She had achieved a level of poof that I didn't even know was physically possible for a cat. It was only when I removed my headphones to better appreciate her apparent nervous breakdown that I heard it. The distinct sound of something inside the dryer that definitely wasn't bedding. Something that, based on the noise, had 4 legs and a tendency to nap in warm, enclosed spaces. I yanked open the dryer door like I was defusing a bomb and outshot Oliver, my other cat, moving at approximately the speed of light. He had apparently decided that the warm bedding in the dryer would make an excellent napping spot, a decision that nearly turned him into the world's first feline astronaut. The whole incident lasted maybe 15 seconds, but it was enough time for me to age approximately 10 years and for Lucy to earn her superhero cape. Oliver, for his part, seemed largely unfazed by his brief adventure in the spin cycle, though he did accept his "sorry I almost tumble-dried you" treats with slightly more enthusiasm than usual. Lucy got double treats, of course. She had transformed from professional coward to professional lifeguard in record time, saving her brother from what could have been a catastrophe, or should I say cat-astrophe? No, I shouldn't, I'm sorry. She spent the rest of the day following Oliver around, presumably to make sure he didn't decide to take a nap in the microwave. I've learned several valuable lessons from this incident. Always check the dryer for cats before turning it on. Actually, just check all appliances for cats at all times. Noise-cancelling headphones, while amazing for productivity, might occasionally try to turn you into an accidental cat criminal. Your cowardly cat might just be waiting for the right moment to reveal their true heroic nature. These days, I do my laundry with one headphone off, like a DJ at the world's most domestic nightclub. Oliver has found new, less dangerous places to nap, though I still check the dryer obsessively before turning it on. And Lucy, well, she still runs from the vacuum cleaner, but we all know that's just her cover. Somewhere under that scaredy cat exterior beats the heart of a true hero. Just don't tell her I said that. She has enough on her plate keeping her brother from accidentally discovering if cats can survive in the dishwasher. Story 6. There are certain things they warn you about when you get a cat. Don't feed them chocolate. Don't let them eat rubber bands. Never trust them around Christmas trees. What they don't tell you is, don't win stuffed animals that look exactly like your cat unless you want to convince her she stumbled into the feline version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It started innocently enough at the office raffle, the kind of mandatory fun event where Karen from accounting gets way too excited about giving away items that probably came from the clearance bin at Target. When my number was called, I surveyed the selection of plush toys with the careful consideration usually reserved for selecting a jury. That's when I saw it. A stuffed cat that looked exactly like my real cat, Pepper. Same grey fur, same white paws, same judgmental expression. It was uncanny. This will make such a cute photo, I thought to myself, displaying the kind of optimism usually reserved for people who think they can assemble IKEA furniture without looking at the instructions. I brought my prize home, positioned it artfully on the bed next to Pepper, and snapped a quick photo. Pepper, being a cat, responded with her usual level of enthusiasm for my creative endeavours, which is to say, absolute indifference. Mission accomplished, I thought, and settled in for an evening of deliberately drowning virtual roller coaster passengers in Roller Coaster Tycoon 2, as one does. That's when I heard it. If you've never heard a cat having an existential crisis, imagine the sound of a small vacuum cleaner discovering its own mortality. Pepper was on the bed, fur puffed out like she'd just stuck her paw in an electrical socket, having what I can only describe as a complete psychological breakdown over her stuffed doppelganger. She was picking up her plush twin by the neck, which, might I add, is not a great thing to witness your cat doing to something that looks exactly like herself, and dragging it around like she was reenacting a scene from a tiny horror movie. Between bouts of relocation, she'd stop and stare into its glass eyes with an expression that suggested she was either contemplating the nature of existence or planning to move to another state and change her identity. The howling didn't stop. It was the kind of cry that makes you wonder if cats can file psychological damage lawsuits. I quickly removed the stuffed imposter, but the damage was done. Pepper had seen too much. She knew too much. She'd gazed into the abyss, and the abyss had her exact fur pattern. When I opened my bedroom door, she shot out like she was auditioning for the Cat Olympics. finding the furthest corner of the apartment to have what appeared to be a complete emotional breakdown. She wouldn't let me near her, probably convinced I was in league with the synthetic shapeshifter that had invaded her territory. There I was, standing in my apartment, holding a stuffed animal that looks like my cat, while my actual cat cowered in the corner, questioning everything she thought she knew about reality. I felt like a supervillain in the world's most specific origin story. All I'd wanted was a cute photo, and instead I'd given my cat an existential crisis. They say pets are good for your mental health, but nobody talks about what happens when you accidentally devastate your cat's mental health with a $5 plush toy from the office raffle. I'm pretty sure this isn't covered in the pet insurance policy. The stuffed cat is now living in the trunk of my car, exactly where cursed objects belong. Pepper eventually forgave me, though she still gives my bedroom door suspicious glances, probably wondering if her evil twin is lurking behind it, waiting to replace her in a bloodless coup. I've learned my lesson. No more stuffed animals that look like my cat. No more attempts at cute photos that might result in feline psychological trauma. And definitely no more office raffles. I'm pretty sure Karen from accounting was in on it the whole time. As for Pepper, she's back to her normal self. Though I catch her sometimes, staring into mirrors with a newfound wariness. I like to think she's learned something profound about the nature of existence, but she probably just learned that her human is an idiot who sometimes brings home cursed objects from work. At least I got the photo though. It's still on my phone, a reminder that sometimes the cutest ideas lead to the most spectacular disasters. I'm thinking of having it framed and keeping it far, far away from Pepper. Story 7. There are certain ways you expect a one-night stand to end. Walking of shame, awkward breakfast, exchange of numbers that neither person intends to use. What you don't expect is to end up in the bathroom with your date's cat's claw marks in your most sensitive area, contemplating whether urgent care takes attacked by cat seriously as a medical emergency. The evening had started promisingly enough. A Tinder date that actually looked like their photos, a miracle in itself. Good conversation, better chemistry, and an invitation back to her place that led to the kind of night that makes you forget about your ex and your student loans simultaneously. I fell asleep feeling like I'd finally figured out this whole dating thing. I woke up alone in her bed, naked as the day I was born, but significantly more satisfied. The sounds of domestic activity drifted up from the kitchen, pots clanking, water running, the general symphony of someone who has their life together enough to make breakfast before noon. I was contemplating whether showing up naked in her kitchen would be charming or alarming when I met my eventual assailant. The cat appeared like a ghost made of grey fluff and good intentions. I didn't know its name, but it immediately decided that we were best friends, purring with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for car engines. Now, I love cats. This is important to note because what happened next might suggest otherwise. This particular cat was a master of presentation, showing off its belly like it was auditioning for the cover of Cat Fancy magazine. I, being a fool who apparently learned nothing from every cat owner's warning ever, took this as an invitation. We engaged in what I can only describe as an interpretive dance of mutual appreciation. The cat, hopping from side to side of my very naked body, me rolling around like a rotisserie chicken, both of us enjoying this moment of pure, innocent joy. That's when physics betrayed me. Have you ever seen those videos of a cat watching something move, their eyes getting huge, and then they pounce? Now imagine that, but the thing they're watching is your own personal equipment doing an impromptu impression of a pendulum. One moment I'm having a wholesome moment with a new feline friend. The next I'm starring in my own private horror movie where the monster is 4 pounds of fluff with needles for fingers. The sound I made was not human. It was the kind of noise that probably had dogs 3 blocks away tilting their heads in confusion. The cat, now realizing it had made a terrible mistake, did what cats do best in crisis situations. It panicked while remaining firmly attached to the source of its panic. This is how my date found us, me sitting up in bed, desperately trying to detach her cat from my most vulnerable area, making the kind of whimpering sounds usually associated with wounded puppies. Cockstuck help is not a phrase I ever thought I'd say to someone I was trying to impress, but there we were. To her credit, she laughed. I suppose when you're faced with a naked man playing involuntary tug of war with your cat, using a body part that definitely wasn't designed for tug of war, laughter is a reasonable response. She calmly reached over and performed what I can only assume was a well-practiced maneuver to unhook her cat's last remaining claw from my person. Now I'm sitting on her toilet, holding tissue to wounds that I'm definitely not putting on my dating profile, wondering if this is the kind of story that becomes funny later or the kind that requires years of therapy. The blood flow has mostly stopped, but my dignity is still critically wounded. I can hear her in the kitchen, probably making breakfast and trying not to laugh too loudly. The cat, I assume, is somewhere plotting its next attack, or more likely, completely unbothered by the psychological damage it just inflicted. They say every scar tells a story. These particular scars are going to tell a story that starts with, I met this girl on Tinder, and ends with, and that's why I always wear armour to bed now. At least it's a unique way to end a one-night stand. Most people just ghost each other. I got attacked by an actual ghost-coloured cat. I'm going to take that shower now, assuming I can walk the 10 feet to get there. And maybe, just maybe, this will turn into one of those stories we tell at our wedding. Though if it does, I'm definitely negotiating with the cat about custody arrangements first. In the meantime, I've learned a valuable lesson. Always check for cats before engaging in naked gymnastics. And maybe next time I'll keep the covers on. Story 8. The thing about being a cat parent is that you never stop feeling like an imposter, like everyone else got some manual that you somehow missed. I'm staring at these identical looking cans of wet food spread across my kitchen counter, doing math I definitely didn't learn in school. Who knew cat calories could be so complicated? My phone buzzes with another reminder. It's feeding time for Mr. Whiskers again. That's not actually his name. I gave him a much more dignified name, but sometimes when it's just us, I call him ridiculous things. He doesn't seem to mind. Until last week, everything was perfect. Well, not perfect, but we had a system. 3 pouches of fancy veterinary food a day. Royal Canin gastrointestinal. The name alone made me feel like a responsible pet owner, but then the shortage hit. Every vet clinic within driving distance just shrugged helplessly when I called. Supply chain issues, they said, like that explained everything. My vet, this amazing woman who somehow manages to make both me and my cat feel less anxious, told me any chicken-based wet food would work. And thank God for that, because my cat is the pickiest eater this side of the Mississippi. He turns his nose up at anything that isn't chicken with the kind of disdain usually reserved for bad contemporary art. But here's where I messed up. There's always a mess up in these stories, isn't there? I didn't check the calories. Me who downloads spreadsheet apps to track my own lunch. Me who survived a terrifying ordeal when my cat got parvovirus and lost so much weight that I now weigh him obsessively every few days like some kind of feline helicopter parent. The weight loss was subtle at first, just a few grams here and there on my little kitchen scale. But it was enough to send me into a spiral of worst-case scenarios until my friend, bless her practical soul, asked the obvious question. Did you check the calorie content? Turns out my cat was running on a 60-calorie deficit every single day. Now we're on a 4 meals a day schedule, which honestly feels like feeding a newborn. But he's happy. I'm working from home anyway, and the multiple alarms on my phone make me feel like I'm living in some kind of highly regimented cat-feeding monastery. The only real problem is that the pet store nearby can't keep his new favourite food in stock either. So here I am, bulk ordering cat food online at midnight, wondering if this is what growing up feels like. The universe has a sense of humour, I'll give it that. At least my cat does too. He's purring on my lap right now, completely unaware of all the drama he's caused. And maybe that's the point. Maybe being a good cat parent isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to set 4 daily alarms on your phone and do complicated calorie math at midnight. Story 9. Here's the thing about suburban wildlife. It exists in this peculiar liminal space between domestication and wilderness, between our manufactured order and nature's chaos. And on this particular night at precisely 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, that dichotomy manifested itself in the form of a lovelorn feline, whose passionate serenades were, quite frankly, destroying my relationship with consciousness. I should probably mention that my house backs up to what can only be described as a feral cat metropolis. Hundreds of them living their own complex social lives in the woods behind my home, like a furry version of a young adult novel where everyone's trying to find their place in the world. And I, in my infinite wisdom and armed with humane traps, had appointed myself as their unofficial population control specialist. $27 per cat at the local clinic, spay, neuter, vaccinate, and an ear tip that serves as their graduation cap from the School of Reproductive Responsibility. But back to 2 a.m. The cat, let's call him Gatsby, because he too was calling out desperately to a love he couldn't have, was performing what I can only describe as the phenomenological equivalent of a boom box scene from an 80s romance movie. My first defense was a can of pennies rattled with the fury of someone who understood the value of REM sleep. Gatsby retreated, but like all great romantics, he returned 15 minutes later for an encore. That's when I made what I now realize was a questionable decision. Leaning out my window into the void of night, I shouted what must be the most contextually unfortunate threat ever uttered. If you don't shut your whore mouth right this instant, I will lock you in a cage. Here's another thing about suburban life. Words carry differently at night. They bounce off houses and cars and trees, finding their way to unintended ears that lack the crucial context of my ongoing battle with the neighborhood's feline population. Fast forward to around sunrise, and my driveway suddenly resembled a law enforcement convention, complete with 4 police cruisers and several stern-faced state troopers who clearly believed they were about to crack a case worthy of a true crime podcast. The next 20 minutes consisted of me trying to explain to these dedicated public servants that I was not, in fact, running some sort of domestic torture chamber, but rather attempting to reason with a particularly vocal cat at an unreasonable hour. My 6 housemates were awakened and interviewed, each confirming that no, they had never been locked in a cage. And yes, I was just that person who spent their free time trying to prevent the local cat population from reaching biblical proportions. In the end, the police left, presumably to file a report that would be passed around the station for years to come. And somewhere in the woods, Gatsby continued his search for love, unaware that he had nearly gotten me arrested. The infinite improbability of it all, the cat, the cops, the confusion, reminded me that life is really just a series of misunderstandings waiting to become stories. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we're all just shouting at metaphorical cats in the middle of the night, hoping someone understands what we really mean. Story 10. There are moments that define us not because of what we do, but because of what we fail to notice. The small details that slip past our consciousness, living in our peripheral vision until they suddenly, devastatingly move into focus. I had always been a cat person, which really means I had always been a person who understood the value of quiet companionship. When I moved into my new apartment, the empty spaces seemed to echo with possibility. Having disposable income felt like a kind of freedom I hadn't known before, and I did what any lonely person with extra money does. I went looking for love in the form of a rescue cat. He was perfect in that imperfect way that all perfect things are. I documented his existence obsessively, as if each photo was proof that this new life I was building was real. I searched through hundreds of snapshots, looking for the one that captured not just his image, but his essence. That particular way he had of making laziness seem like an art form. When I found it, I wanted to share it with everyone. It's funny how pride makes us blind. I sent it to my boss, professional boundaries dissolving in the face of fur and whiskers. My family, proof that I was thriving. My friends, evidence that I wasn't as alone as they might worry. Each response came back the same. The kind of polite acknowledgement that you give when someone shows you their ultrasound and you can't quite make out what you're supposed to be seeing. Time passed in the way it does, in coffee cups and calendar pages. Until 3 weeks later, when my friend and I sat across from each other in a cafe that smelled like morning and possibilities. The conversation lulled and she pulled out her phone with the kind of deliberate casualness that always precedes something important. "Do you see it?" she asked, holding up the photo I'd sent. I didn't. Behind his head? And then I did. The dildo unused, wrong size, forgotten sat there like a punchline to a joke I didn't know I was telling. It was almost worse that it wasn't even part of my active life. Just a mistake of online shopping relegated to the background of my existence until it chose this moment to make its debut. Here's the thing about embarrassment. It's really just shame wearing a funnier hat. And shame is really just the fear that people will see the parts of us we don't want them to see, even when those parts are literally just sitting there in plain sight. I wanted to explain about the wrong size, about how it wasn't what it looked like. But explanations about sex toys always sound like lies, even when they're true, especially when they're true. Sometimes I think about all the people I sent that photo to, my boss, my mother, my former Sunday school teacher who still sends me birthday cards. I think about how they either saw it and said nothing or didn't see it at all. I'm not sure which is worse. In the end, it's just another story about how we never really see ourselves clearly. How we can look at something 100 times and miss what's right in front of us. How sometimes the most embarrassing moments of our lives are just waiting in the background, out of focus but perfectly framed, until someone else points them out. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we're all just walking around with our own metaphorical dildos in the background of our perfectly curated photos, hoping no one looks too closely. Maybe that's what makes us human. Story 11. You know how some people have these epic travel stories that start with, well, this one time, and end with everyone crying laughing? Yeah, this isn't one of those. This is more like my personal horror story that I'm pretty sure will haunt me until I'm 80. So picture this, me saying goodbye to mum before moving to New Zealand, casual life change, MBD, getting absolutely demolished by her adorable new kitten. We're talking the tiniest little murder machine you've ever seen, all fluff and razor claws. Did I mind? Nope. Was this a terrible life choice? Oh yes. Here's where it gets good. And by good, I mean catastrophically bad. Mum drops me at the airport the next day, hands me these sleeping pills, because apparently that's a thing mums do, and sends me on my way. Let me paint this scene for you. International flight, stopover in Fiji, me being the actual worst at sleeping on planes. So what do? Pop those pills like they're Tic Tacs and settle in for what I thought would be a peaceful journey. I wake up about an hour before landing to what can only be described as my own personal nightmare. Multiple flight attendants are staring at me in horror. The seat next to me, completely empty, my former seatmate having apparently fled the scene. And then comes the dawning realization that I had apparently been doing my best exorcist impression while unconscious. You guys, I had been projectile vomiting in my sleep on an international flight on my seatmate. But wait, it gets better. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. We land in Fiji and suddenly I'm being whisked away to quarantine because, fun fact, this was during the Ebola outbreak. Nothing says welcome to paradise, quite like being treated like a walking biohazard, right? Plot twist, it wasn't Ebola, it was cat scratch fever. Yes, that's a real thing, and yes, I got it from mum's adorable little demon kitten. The scratches on my hand had turned into these weird brown bubble things that took forever to heal. Because apparently, that's just my luck. To the guy who had to sit next to me, I think about you at least once a month, and I'm so sorry. I know you probably spent weeks convinced you'd caught Ebola from the random girl who threw up on you mid-flight. If you're reading this somehow, you're not. I swear I'm normally much better at containing my bodily fluids. Here's what I learned. Don't take random sleeping pills your mum gives you. Don't pet strange kittens right before international flights. And maybe just don't be me. P.S. The scratches took over a month to heal completely and I still can't look at airplane seats the same way. Is this karma? This feels like karma. PPS to everyone saying cat scratch fever takes longer than 24 hours to show up. You're probably right. The timeline's a bit fuzzy, unlike my memory of the flight attendants' faces, which is crystal clear thanks trauma. Story 12. Let me tell you about the day my cat almost got me fired. I teach middle school, which these days means staring at a grid of tiny faces on my computer screen. The whole district went virtual during the pandemic, though we're finally heading back to real classrooms soon. Thank goodness, because teaching from home comes with complications, like cats. Specifically, my cat Maurice. Picture this. I'm in the middle of explaining algebraic expressions to my 7th graders, when movement catches my eye. There's Maurice, my beloved terror of a cat, creeping toward my prized money tree. This isn't just any houseplant. This money tree and I have history. 4 years of carefully tending its leaves, nursing it through winter drafts, and watching it grow from a tiny sprout into a magnificent specimen. Time slows down. I see Maurice's muscles bunch, his tail twitches, and then, because cats are agents of chaos, he pounces. The crash is spectacular. Dirt explodes across my floor like a miniature volcano. Branches snap. My beautiful money tree lies in ruins, 3 of its largest branches broken clean off. One moment, class, I say with forced calm, thinking I've hit the mute button. I really thought I hit that mute button. I rush to assess the damage, letting out a series of increasingly desperate no. Maurice, apparently quite pleased with his handiwork, decides this is the perfect time for a game of chase. As I lunge for him, he darts away, knocking over even more of my belongings. That's when it happens. The words burst out of me before I can stop them. Come here, you fucking rat bastard. This is usually a term of endearment in our household, but not at this particular moment. Only after successfully banishing Morris to the bedroom and frantically gathering up pieces of my beloved plant do I return to my computer. That's when I see the chat messages flooding my screen. Mrs. Parker, your mic is on. We can hear everything. Best class ever. My stomach drops through the floor. 28 middle schoolers just witnessed their teacher having a complete meltdown. I spend the next 10 minutes apologizing profusely, explaining the situation and praying I still have a job tomorrow. Spoiler alert, I did keep my job. The principal even laughed when I explained what happened. Maurice, meanwhile, remains completely unrepentant. Story 13. Here's the thing about love. Sometimes it gives you tapeworms. That's not a metaphor. I mean actual tapeworms. The kind that crawl out of your cat's ass and into your bed while you sleep. But I should start at the beginning. In January, I adopted this massive senior cat. 19 pounds of pure love. He was 11 years old and his previous family had returned him after 6 months. They said he had fleas, whatever. Their loss was my gain, and gain I did, more than I bargained for. The thing about senior cats is they're like those mystery boxes people bid on at auctions. You never know what's inside until you've already committed. My mystery box came with half his teeth missing, an infected incision, and, as I would later discover, a belly full of parasitic stowaways. Early February rolled around. My cat started doing this weird thing where he'd only pee in his litter box. Pooping? That was strictly a hardwood floor activity. Thank whatever gods exist for non-carpeted apartments. He'd do his business and bolt under my bed like the devil himself was chasing him. The vet, who I'd seen more times in 6 weeks than I'd seen my own mother in a year, said it was behavioural. Allergies, they said. Something he'll have to live with, they said. They were wrong. Fast forward to last week. My cat stops coughing and suddenly I feel like death warmed over. My best friend jokes that I caught whatever my cat had. Sometimes the universe has a sick sense of humour like that. Then came Monday morning, the day everything went to hell. Picture this. You wake up to the familiar smell of cat poop on your hardwood floor. But today's different. Today there are things moving in it, living things, wriggling things. And when you inspect your bed, the bed where you and your beloved cat cuddle every night, you find them. Tiny rice-shaped demons everywhere. These weren't grout crumbles from my brick wall. These were tapeworm eggs. I had been sleeping in a parasite nursery. The vet confirmed it. My cat got his meds, $13 worth of peace of mind. I got mine too. $130 worth of welcome to American healthcare. But wait, it gets better. My heat stopped working that night. So there I was, curled up on my couch without blankets, because they were all contaminated, knowing I had worms living inside me. Living inside me. The pharmacy called. Did you know your prescription is $130? No, I didn't know. I've never had tapeworms before. Funny how that works. Then my friend tells me about clove oil for your butthole, because apparently these little monsters like to bite on their way out. Because of course they do. The medication made every worm die a dramatic death inside me. I felt each one go. Then my face swelled up like a balloon because, surprise, I'm allergic to the medication that's killing the worms that are already trying to kill me. Another virtual doctor visit, $140. Another prescription, steroids this time. The pharmacy staff looked at my swollen face and asked if I knew I was allergic to the first medication. Let me say this one more time. Why would anyone know if they're allergic to tapeworm medication before they have tapeworms? So here I am, unemployed during a pandemic, alone except for my cat, afraid to poop, face swollen, but breathing. My cat, he's great now. No more coughing, no more floor poops. worth every worm. The moral of this story: love is weird. Sometimes it gives you parasites. Sometimes it costs you $270 in medication. Sometimes it makes you afraid of your own bed. But here's the real truth. I'd do it all again for that cat. Just maybe with more frequent vet visits next time. Welcome to Wormageddon 2020, where love means never having to say, "I'm sorry for giving you tapeworms." Story 15. I made what I thought was a rational decision that summer. Leave my Florida apartment, move back in with Dad in Chicago. Work from home meant home could be anywhere. Simple math. Why pay rent when family offered shelter? The packing felt endless. Some things went into storage, others into my car. My constant companion through it all was Randall Flagg, my cat, who watched with judging eyes as I dismantled our shared space. We drove north together, state by state. Florida melted into Georgia, Georgia into Tennessee. By Kentucky, I was flying, literally. The speedometer crept past 100 in a 70 zone. It felt like freedom until red and blue lights flashed behind me. The Kentucky State Trooper approached my passenger side, away from the rushing traffic. When my electric windows failed, he opened the door himself. We had a brief conversation about keeping Randall secure. I offered to step out. He declined. 1 minute later, back on the highway, my heart stopped. The passenger seat empty, the back seat empty. No familiar black shape curled anywhere. Panic hit like a thunderbolt. I abandoned my car on the shoulder and ran south, screaming his name until my voice gave out. The summer heat pressed down. Thorny burrs clung to my clothes as I searched the roadside fields. A woman living nearby hadn't seen him. I called everyone. The local police, my vet, Mom, Dad. My voice cracked as I explained again and again. The state troopers proved unexpectedly kind. They drove me around searching. The officer who'd pulled me over returned to help. Local families offered sympathy and phone numbers. Then my car wouldn't start. Battery drained from hazard lights. As I dug through my packed belongings, searching for jumper cables, there he was, Randall Flagg, curled in peaceful slumber among my clothes in a garbage bag. The troopers helped jumpstart my car, professional and understanding. We finished our journey to Chicago the next day, driving precisely at the speed limit. Randall Flagg now lounges in Dad's house like royalty, as if nothing ever happened. I still find Kentucky burrs in those clothes sometimes. They remind me of the day I thought I'd lost everything, only to find it safely hidden away, waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below sharing your own cat stories. I read every comment. And check out these other videos for more regrettable recaps. Until next time.